Okay, so let's get back to considering just one plant and profit maximization as opposed to just cost minimization. So let's say that we have some sort of plant or factory that has a cost structure shown here, right? So we have in the first column the units of production, in the second column total fixed costs. Fixed costs here are $1,000. Total variable costs that are shown here. And then total costs are just equal to total fixed costs and total variable costs. So what we want to do then is calculate average costs. And average costs are just total costs divided by the number of units of production. And so it gives you sort of a holistic sense that, or a holistic estimate of when you fold in the fixed costs and the variable costs and you get total costs, and you try to figure out on a per unit basis how much it costs to produce something. Average costs are what would indicate that. And so we can go line by line and calculate these. In the first row, we can't actually because we're dividing by a zero because we have 0 units of production here. In row 2, our average costs are $1.5 per unit. And we get that by saying total costs, or $1,500, divided by 1,000 units. In row 3, our average costs are 93 cents per unit. And we get that by dividing the total costs of 1,850 divided by 2,000. In row 4, we have average costs of 70 cents per unit. And we get that by dividing $2,100 in total costs divided by 3,000 units of production. And we can go row by row and fill out average total costs. And then what might be interesting is to plot average total costs versus the units of production to see what we get. So this is what that visualizes. So on the y-axis, we have average cost in dollars per unit. And on the y-axis here, we have units produced. And what you can see is that the average cost on a per unit basis declines significantly as you produce more units up to a certain point, and then it kind of levels off. So when we go from producing about 1,000 to 5,000 or 6,000, there's a huge drop in the average cost per unit. And then after 6,000 or 7,000, the average cost levels out and it stays about the same. So why does the average cost go down as a function of the units produced, at least at first? The answer is that the fixed costs, remember we have to pay $1,000 no matter how many units we produce, are spread out over more units of production. And we call this phenomenon economies of scale, right? The fact that you can produce more things and spread the fixed cost that you have to pay no matter how many you produce over more and more individual units of production. And what that does is that each embedded in the average cost of each unit that's produced is a smaller and smaller and smaller piece of that fixed cost. That drives the average cost down. This is hugely important to the historical development of the electric power industry and most other stuff. And we'll talk more about this over the next couple of weeks. So economies of scale are the phenomenon where average costs decline as a function of units produced, right? And the reason is because the total fixed costs, $1,000 here, can be spread out over more individual units of production, and that allows the average cost to decline. We have one more column to fill in here, and that is marginal costs. So marginal costs is a rate of change, right? So that's what these triangles represent. It's a delta or a change in. So at every point, at every level of production, the marginal cost represents the change in cost for a change in production, right? And so we can calculate this at every point along the cost curve. So again, in the first row, we can't really calculate this. But in the second row, we can, right? So remember, the marginal cost is the change in cost for a change in production. So if we compare row 2 to row 1, the change in cost is $1,500 minus $1,000. So a net increase in cost of $500 from going from row 1 to row 2. The change in the units of production is for going from 0 to 1,000. So we have 1,500 minus 1,000 in the numerator, so 500, and in the denominator we have 1,000. What that means is that we're dividing 500 by 1,000, which gives you 0.5. So the marginal cost of production when you're producing 1,000 units is 0.5. So let's go down and do row 3 as well. So in row 3, the change in cost would be the cost of producing 2,000 units, or $1,850 minus the cost of producing 1,000 units. So that's $1,500. That gives us $350. And the change in the units of production is going from 1,000 to 2,000, so 1,000. So in the numerator, we have 350, and we're dividing by a change in production of 1,000, so that gives us 35 cents. So the marginal cost of production when you're producing 2,000 units is 35 cents. Let's do one more. You're in row 4, if we're trying to figure out the marginal cost of production when you're producing 3,000, the change in costs that we experience is going from 1,850 to 2,100, and the change in production is going from 2,000 to 3,000. So the difference between 2,100 and 1,850 in the total cost column is 250, and if we divide 250 by the change in production from 2,000 to 3,000, which is 1,000, 250 divided by 1,000 gives us 25 cents per unit. And so what might be helpful is on your own time to go through some of these calculations for average costs, but also marginal costs to see if the numbers work out for you. So we can also plot marginal costs on this same figure where we have average costs. So what does the marginal cost curve tell us exactly? So you could think of it as a measure of how much it would cost to produce one more unit at any level of production. In other words, if you're already producing 5,000 units, how much more would it cost me to produce one more unit? So let's use that as an example. Let's say we're already producing 5,000 units. How much would it cost us to produce one more? And the answer, we can go to the level of production that we're interested in. So the row 5,000 units, we can go across to see what the marginal cost would be. And the answer is 30 cents. So if we're already producing 5,000 units, how much would it cost to produce one more? The answer is 30 cents.